ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Since Kamala Harris stepped in as the Democrats' presidential nominee, the polls have tightened in key swing states. And already Donald Trump and his supporters are laying the groundwork to challenge the legitimacy of the result if she wins. Today, Geoff Kabaservice from the Niskanen Centre in Washington, D.C. on the election deniers who'll refuse to accept a Trump loss. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily.
We are going to fight like hell to win this election. They are going to cheat like hell to win the election.
Geoff, as Trump works to be re-elected, it seems he's been singing from the same old songbook, already trying to cement this idea that the election is in some way already being stolen.
So Donald Trump has always maintained that if he does not win an election, then it must have been stolen. He has consistently taken this position ever since the Iowa caucuses in 2016, which he lost to Ted Cruz.
But I think they should probably throw him out of Iowa because what he did is a disgrace. And it's a disgrace to the electoral process, to be honest with you.
And of course, he famously refused to accept the results of the 2020 election, which Joe Biden won.
As you know, I've claimed certain states, and he's claiming states. But there's been a lot of shenanigans, and we can't stand for that in our country.
And this led directly to the January 6th insurrection. Trump has been very much, as you say, singing from the same hymnal. He is this year saying that if he does not win the 2024 presidential election, then that can only have been as a result of fraud. And he is making unspecified threats about what will happen when his disgruntled supporters wake up to find that Trump has been denied his rightful election victory.
At one point this month, he was standing behind a bulletproof screen at a rally in North Carolina, and he was saying he was determined to make sure the Democrats don't cheat. It's pretty blatant.
Our primary focus is not to get out the vote. It's to make sure they don't cheat. Because we have all the votes you need. You can see it. Every house along the way has signs. Trump, 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 Trump fans, Trump fans.
Yes, Trump has been vague about how he thinks the Democrats will cheat to deprive him of his rightful election victory. Sometimes he claims this is through massive fraud by non-voters, illegal immigrants who were voting in ways they can't legally do so. Sometimes he claims this is a result of mail-in ballots. And of course, some of Trump's wilder supporters have all kinds of other alternative theories, which we saw in 2020, which may or may not involve servers and malign actors in Venezuela and who knows what. But Trump definitely believes, and his supporters equally believe, that the only way that he can lose is through fraud.
Yeah. He wrapped this up as well, didn't he, after Kamala Harris took over from Joe Biden, arguing that the switch in itself was in some way an election trick.
Yes, somehow or other Trump maintains that Democrats illegally removed Joe Biden as the nominee, that this was some sort of coup, and that Kamala Harris should not actually be the legitimate presidential nominee for the Democratic Party.
That was a coup, and I'm no fan of his at all. And it started with the debate, and from that point on, it just got worse and worse. But that was a coup. It was a vicious, violent overthrow of a president of the United States.
It looks a lot like what he tried in the lead up to the 2020 election, because months before that election, he was also trying to seed the doubt about the integrity of the election back then. It was all about mail voting then, wasn't it? Just remind me about that.
So 2020's election, of course, took place during the pandemic, when it was dangerous for Americans to cast their voting ballots in person. And as a result of that, many states resorted to means to make it easier to vote by mail. It once had been rather difficult to vote by mail unless you were military personnel stationed overseas or unless you had a medical reason. But now, actually, I believe there's 8 states that conduct their elections only by mail, and it's much easier to vote by mail in other states. But at that point, Trump was maintaining that the mail-in ballot process was vulnerable to enormous amounts of fraud, and therefore any election that was conducted as a result of these new procedures was almost by definition illegitimate.
They're sending millions of ballots all over the country. There's fraud. They found them in creeks. They found some with the name Trump, just happened to have the name Trump. This is going to be a fraud like you've never seen.
And that was the basis on which, for example, Congress voted on whether they ought not to certify the Pennsylvania election results on the evening of January 6th after the insurrection.
All right, so Geoff, now let's look at how this might play out if Trump is defeated by Kamala Harris come November, and just how the Republicans have been getting ready for this possibility. To do that, let's go to Georgia, which of course is a key swing state. It was a state, wasn't it, that was incredibly important at the last election and which Joe Biden narrowly won.
Yes, very much so. And it was also the state where Donald Trump pressured election officials to find him enough votes to put him over the top in that election.
I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
And Trump really needs to win this time, of course. And the polls are showing that since Kamala Harris took over, things are really tight. So just tell me what is happening in Georgia to assist Trump if he loses at the election.
I think it's worth prefacing this by saying that most Americans are not paying attention to these issues at all. If you were to stop 100 Americans on the street of Washington, D.C., where I'm right now, and ask them about recent Georgia State Elections Board's actions, they would not have any idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
But the fact is that Georgia's board has enacted 2 rules recently that seem to allow for the possibility of local election officials interfering with the state's vote counting process. So there's 3 board members who were put on this elections board. They're all Trump supporters. They've all questioned the results of the 2020 election. And basically, the rules are trying to alter the role of local election officials, whose job is to gather the vote tallies from polling places, add up the tallies, and then report those numbers to Georgia's Secretary of State, who's the official responsible for election matters. But now the possibility seems to be that instead of just performing a basic ministerial task of tabulating votes, now they have new authority to search for supposed irregularities in the election and to refuse to certify an election if they claim to find some. So this is why the Democratic Party and several Democratic officials in Georgia have filed a lawsuit challenging these new rules.
Yeah, okay, so there's a few members of the Georgia Election Board who are Trump supporters, and they've brought in a rule that could lead to a delay in the certification of November's presidential result, basically.
Yes, that's an accurate statement of the case. And I think it's also worth pointing out that election officials across the entire country have come under threats in many cases from people who believe that they are cheating and trying to throw the elections to Democrats. There's been an enormous amount of turnover among these election officials. Many of them are still fearful. And there are also rules that have been passed in states that have brought in, first of all, Trump supporters who, again, are very much bought into the idea that the election of 2020 was fraudulent, and who, frankly, at this point are not good faith actors who can be trusted to conduct a neutral process.
And incredibly, Geoff, Trump even praised the members of the election board at a rally in Atlanta. He even named them.
Yes, he did, which, again, suggests he thinks that they are on his side.
They're doing a great job. 3 members. Janice Johnson, Rick Jeffries, and Janelle King. 3 people are all pit bulls fighting for honesty, transparency, and victory. They're fighting.
It's hard to communicate my shock at this, but that's a complete violation of Americans' faith in the democratic process. But
yes.
I think this is partly Trump's aim, precisely to destroy Americans' faith in what had hitherto been seen as neutral, almost sacred processes.
And as you say, the Democrats are now challenging this ruling in the courts. They're suing in Georgia, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there.
Yes.
All right, so Geoff, there's a very active campaign to try and question the legitimacy of the November result if Donald Trump loses. Just to be clear, there was absolutely no evidence whatsoever in 2020 of any irregularities or wrongdoing.
Yes, that's correct. And the Trump campaign challenged the results in some 60-plus court cases, many of which were overseen by Trump-appointed judges, and there was absolutely no evidence found of fraud. And I should also add that the Trump administration actually launched a voter integrity commission, and it disbanded in 2018 after it found no evidence to support claims of widespread voter fraud.
Well, let's look now at how this might play out after the election. There has been, of course, a number of changes since 2020. So just remind me of those. And does that protect the democratic system? Of course, Trump has an ally in this argument, doesn't he, with J.D. Vance really singing from the same tune book.
True. J.D. Vance has said that if he was the vice president in 2020, that he would not have voted to certify the election results, that he, in fact, would have allowed for Trump supporters to put forward alternative slates of electors in the different states, and that somehow or other this should be sorted out at the state level. However, it's critically important that in this November's election, Trump will not be president, and J.D. Vance will not be up there in Congress in the process of certifying the election. And since 2020, Congress has passed the Electoral Count Act reform of 2022. And this was an important measure, I think, to update the archaic Electoral Count Act of 1887 that clarifies that the vice president merely presides over the electoral count process in Congress. He or she does not decide election results. And therefore, the Trump legal scheme that was cooked up with John Eastman, one of his legal counsels, to have the vice president refuse to certify the election, that would not be something that we would see this year.
Just tell me, if Trump can't overturn the result, the seeding of the doubt is actually really damaging, isn't it? Recently, he told a group of Christians it could be the last election they have to actually vote in. They may never need to vote again.
You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. What
does he mean by that?
Well, the thing about Trump is that he likes being ambiguous when it comes to such statements. So on the one hand, that could have been a completely benign statement, Trump reassuring his Christian supporters that once he is elected this November, things will be so great going forward that they simply won't need to vote again because America will rally behind Trump. He'll get huge landslide majorities. Republicans will win every election from now until kingdom come, and everything will be great. But, Trump also has a way of putting these other somewhat more sinister interpretations as possibilities in his statements. And what he could be saying is that there simply won't be a need to vote in future elections because they will be canceled. Now, does Trump have a plan to do that? I rather doubt it. But I think his supporters like hearing the idea that Trump might simply abrogate the normal procedures of American democracy. So there are a lot of things that Trump is saying which might be on the surface benign, but have more sinister interpretations possible.
Absolutely. So how dangerous is all of this, do you think, for democracy in the United States and for the world?
It's hard to know, but I think Trump has succeeded in sowing widespread doubts among his supporters in the democratic process. And, I think it's almost a guaranteed thing that when it's election night and the results are not known, Trump is going to declare that he has won the election. And he will maybe encourage his supporters to turn out and ensure that the election results going to Trump are not overturned by Democratic authorities. And then that could open the door to widespread violence and other forms of insurrection. So, we're in a very dangerous situation, and this has severe implications for both this country and the world.
Geoff Kabaservice is from the Niskanen Centre in Washington, D.C., a centre-right think tank. This episode was produced by Cara Jensen-McKinnon, Sydney Peed and Anna John. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again on Monday. Thanks for listening.